Hello there, we are your hosts Vivek and Pavitra from the Agile Coach podcast. In this podcast, we bring fresh perspectives to you through our interviews with thought leaders in Agile coaching, facilitation, business analysis, and product management roles. Enjoy.
So I'm glad we get to collaborate and both of our communities get to find each other. Maybe some people find new Agile friends and, friends of any type. I'm Joe Justice. I currently teach online classes. Man, I didn't think I'd introduce myself that way. Many people consider me the founder of Agile hardware. And I like that description. I think that works pretty well. That describes a lot of what I've been up to. I founded a car company in 2006 called WikiSpeed, and we used Agile methods because that's all I knew. I wasn't intending to prove to the world that Agile hardware works. Simply, it's the only method I was skilled in.
Yeah.
And it did work. We set 4 world records, and I competed against Tesla at that time in 2010, and we actually won, which was amazing. That's while the Model S was being developed, it was called the White Star Project, and the Roadster was being delivered from Tesla at that time.
Wow.
We were making what was called the WikiSpeed SGT-01, and at that time it won. Then ultimately, I became a Tesla employee. I consulted to Tesla in 2010. I set up the first Agile trainings there in 2016, and I became an employee and ran the Agile program in Tesla in 2020. In between, I was a developer at Microsoft, and also led the Agile transformation for the Xbox group, hardware and software, Microsoft Xbox. Well, maybe led's too strong a word. I was part of a team. I did do a lot of it. I mean, I guess I could say led and that'd be legitimate, but I'd also be taking credit for a lot of the team's work. I was part of a team. And I did a lot, but there was a team and they were great.
Yeah.
And I did work with Amazon in 2016. I've currently consulted to all of the world's major car companies and all of the world's major aerospace companies. I've either consulted to or trained or worked in all of those and all of the world's largest military defense contractors. Whether that's something to be proud of or not, at least it's great high tech, and security is important, but man, I don't know, that's a mixed ethical bag. Currently, something I am much more proud of, I still am CEO of WikiSpeed, and we make Tesla tuning parts. People who want the thrill of racing, like actual race capable, but some people want it just for the style. Bringing that to electric vehicles at a very affordable and very high performance level is a passion of mine. And so wikispeed.com has Tesla tuning parts available if you contact via the contacts button. The Model S Plaid and the Model 3 are the cars we've done so far. We just got a Model Y. We'll start tuning that next.
Nice.
Then I'm an advisor for Agile manufacturing for Cyberlander. Some people may or may not know. It's a armored, basically pop-up camper. So imagine an armored pop-up camper for the zombie apocalypse or climate change Armageddon for the Tesla Cybertruck. There's many other products in the portfolio, but the one furthest along in development and with many renders and some betas already visible is the Cyberlander. So an overlander for the Cybertruck. I'm really excited about it. Its idea is like a mobile office. You could put it in your driveway or your backyard or way out in the mountains or in the desert and have this boutique luxury hotel room, office, love suite thing. It's really cool. I think we're the largest online training provider for agility, at least in all of Asia, I think. We really hit success. So we start, I think my background works. We start with a foundations level class that happens to grant a certified Scrum Master credential. It's not like any certified Scrum Master course I've seen anywhere. It's basically step 1 of how to operate a company like Elon Musk. And it happens to grant a CSM.
Yes.
And level 2, we introduced finance and vendor collaboration. People might say vendor management, but I'd say collaboration is probably better for the way we're doing it. And also more on digital self-management and management automation. And that grants the level 2 credential, CSPO. We do the technical certified Scrum developer as well, and an executive class. And then the ultimate is Agile for hardware, software, and business, the whole company. And it's what I learned working for Elon Musk. That's the most advanced agility I've ever seen. And I call that Joe DX, not to take credit, but actually to try to be humble. I want to call it the Musk model. I really do. That sounds good. It's cool.
Yeah.
I don't think I understand everything Elon is doing. I think I got a lot of it. I think this is the best in the world online training to learn how Elon operates companies. But I don't think I can call it the Musk model. I think it's as much as I understand of it. Yeah. And I think it's the best in the world. Agility is making change cheaper in time and money, and also in emotional willpower, like making it less draining or even more fun. Mm-hmm. That is the game. How Elon says pace of innovation is the only thing that matters in the long run. And that's working really well for Elon from a business perspective. Agility is that. How do you ramp innovation? Typically from a business perspective, but there's engineering supporting practices, vendor collaboration supporting practices, contract budgeting supporting practices. Mm-hmm. But the idea is, how do you take a company that's used to making 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-year budgets and help that company have a comfortable, easy, fun time pivoting today based on a supply chain crunch or a significant change in your supply chain or buyer taste or et cetera? How do you make that pivot take seconds instead of years? And that's what agility does really well. From a business perspective, Elon has the master plan. And it's not just Elon, but really Elon does drive it and is very vocal about it. Mm-hmm. And then everyone proposes a measurable metric that's an experiment to help the master plan come true. Yeah. So Tesla's master plan is advanced, sustainable energy for all of civilization. That's Tesla's mission.
Here so one of the out of here, right? Here and in Mars and just in the galaxy.
Yeah, for the expanding human civilization. Yeah. The SpaceX is make humans multiplanetary. So it fits perfectly together. And Neuralink is keep pace with AI. Have humans keep pace with AI. They all collaborate towards maybe an exciting future. Yeah. Like the master plan of those master plans is make the future exciting. Not like population drop and die off on one planet, which is less exciting than a star-faring civilization with Dogecoin auto-training running on Neuralink in our brain, backed up by Starlink satellites in space that no one country owns. Wow, bizarre, but cool. So anyone can propose a KPI, a measurable goal towards that, like let's sell more electric cars or more electric cars in use. And then a higher percentage of newly manufactured electric cars being electric. Mm-hmm. And then total emissions reductions, also including ocean faring, freight, air travel, etc. Total, right? Yeah. So you have a KPI, it's like percent of transport that's electric, fully electric, no combustion. That's measurable. Yeah. And then percent of new car sales, so a piece of that, not even ocean going freight yet, but just car sales. Yeah. That's electric. And then what are the reasons what do we guess are the reasons that people choose a non-electric car when they do buy one? Well, one might be range anxiety. Okay, well now we can propose a KPI that's can we make the range go up without increasing price? Mm-hmm. So you have this cascading sequence of KPIs, which had no name when I worked in Tesla. I vainly named it in my online trainings. I call it the Justice Board. Yeah. I did not invent it. And I say that in the class. I observed it in action. It already existed. It predated me joining the company. It had no name. I took it. Yeah. And I think I improved on it in some meaningful ways. I think I added value. So I feel not totally worthless calling it the Justice Board. So it's this cascading chain of KPIs, and they change every day as people come up with new ideas and the AIs have new ideas. So that's the business value connection towards this vision that's basically set by Elon, but anyone can collaborate. An ideal leader is an ideal contributor. That's Musk's philosophy, and it works super well.
Mm-hmm.
because engineers, especially if they're not working for the best pay, want to feel they're not taken advantage of. And I think that's a fairly common human trait. I think most people want to feel they're not being taken advantage of.
Mm-hmm.
So Elon lives it visibly. Elon has a sleeping bag.
Yeah.
And wherever the bottleneck is thought to be,
Yeah.
Elon works there. He joins the group, and it's not like he tells people what to do or asks for reports. He tries to engineer.
Yeah.
And actually, Elon's a very talented engineer. So Elon joins the software development group, the maintenance group, whatever they're doing. A lot of the time it's paint. Actually, paint is often the bottleneck, which is where I spent most of my time.
Wow.
That's where Elon's sleeping bag was when I joined, was paint. And Elon works there 12 or more hours and then goes to sleep there.
Sleep in a sleeping bag.
Right there in a sleeping bag. Elon doesn't have a house anymore. He doesn't even own one.
Yeah.
And sleeps there. And everyone, and Elon models this, before leaving, I would typically leave between 5 p.m. and 7 p.m. I get there between 4 a.m. and 5 a.m.
Yeah.
When you leave, or in Elon's case, when Elon just goes to sleep, whatever tool you're using, a laptop, a welder, whatever it is, you hand that to someone else. So the group work continues. They don't have to like log in, log out. They use the same one.
Yeah.
So that enforces like nothing's going to wait for you and you don't own anything. Like it is the mission. Like that's not your laptop. That's not your login. Like they're just going to keep coding or whatever it is. And then Elon goes to sleep, or I would go home.
Yeah.
I stayed really near in a Marriott Residence Inn, which is actually quite nice.
Yeah.
Right by the plant. And then when Elon wakes up, and when I come in, or when anyone comes in, they look at these boards, the Justice Board, to say, where do we guess the bottleneck is now? And then you go there if they're recruiting, right? If they think more people will help. So that's an ideal contributor. And that's what Elon does. Now, it's harder than that. As the executive, Elon spends most mornings in court because positive change, whether it's positive or not, but even if it's positive, positive change has constant attack against it because there are always some who benefit from not changing. So if you have an agile company, if you have a company that's embracing innovation, that is ramping innovation, you are under constant attack.
Yeah.
So Elon and then other executives, and then to a lesser extent, managers, you're right, because they're signing up for responsibility. They're in court in the morning. And then after court, 9 a.m., 10 a.m., depending on the session, they try to do that early.
Yeah.
Then they're in the factory, typically until midnight.
Wow.
And then they go to sleep. And 7 days a week.
7 days a week.
That's the schedule. Now, Elon does date some of the most beautiful people in the world. So there's that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like there's nothing good or desirable or admirable going for Elon. But really, that's about it.
Yeah.
Like, Elon doesn't own a yacht. Like, none of that. Common misconception is we need to add consultant, agile expert that are not developing. Man, Elon would fire those people immediately. You got to work. You got to be part of the solution, right? And you got to be a force multiplier. You have to not only be really good because you know this agile stuff, you have to bring up the level of your whole working group because you know this agile stuff, or it has no business value.
Yeah.
Mob solves for this. So the first 10 hours of Mob are probably just the developers with the Scrum Master joining and trying to be useful. Maybe your Scrum Master is already highly technical, but maybe they have zero technical skill. So when they're driver, people just tell them exactly what to do. If you can survive that embarrassment, and if the group builds a good sense of humor and psychological safety, so it's not embarrassing and actually feels good, if you can do that for 10 hours, then invite your business decision maker in. I'd call that the product owner, but whatever you want.
Yeah.
And have them join and try to survive that for another 90 hours, get to 100 hours.
Yeah.
And then try Mob level 3. The reason I say Mob level 2 is because by then you're introducing the rear admiral role, which is a very natural role for the product owner to be in. And they've got to play driver too. But when they're mobber, they can be rear admiral. And if you can survive that for 100 hours total and get to mob level 3, you are a high performing team of cross-functional people, and you shared the knowledge of the Scrum Master, the mentoring, the training, the coaching. You shared the knowledge of the product owner, the business need, the contacts, the connections, who they have to ask for support. And you have team ownership, and you can delete Scrum. You don't need 353 anymore. It's gone. You don't need the 5 events. You don't need the 3 outputs. If you can survive mob for 100 hours in a happy way that people like. So it's also a human factors perspective.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. It's always fun to talk about these things. Yeah, I'm not really great at anything. I just do a lot of stuff. So as we look at my experience, I'm an expert at nothing. But I don't know, sometimes that mixed experience is good. It gives us all different perspective. And so my job at Google is really to help make sure that we communicate well out from what are we doing in our product. So I cover things like containers and GKE and serverless and dev tools. And so my outbound product management team works with the PMs, make sure that we kind of amplify the right message to the market. We work with marketing and field teams and things like that. And at the same time, we listen to a lot of market feedback. I talk to analysts all the time and press and other folks and customers and try to learn what's the market think of the products and then pull that back into our strategy. So it's a fun role to get to sit between both, but I've done product marketing for a number of years, did product management for a few years, did product ownership and architecture and dev and all kinds of wild stuff. So, I like to learn. That's why I teach Pluralsight courses. I figure if I have to teach something, I have to know it first. So at least it forces me to learn topics and things like that. So between that and writing books and pretending to be a decent father to kids, I keep myself busy. Yeah, when I first got hired as a product owner back in, 2012, I had absolutely no idea what that job was. I was fortunate that, it was a startup. It was a group where there really wasn't much product management. Yeah, it was very engineering led. And so, we brought in some folks, including one of my mentors, Jim Newkirk, who was actually one of the creators of Agile and Scrum and things like that. And so being able to learn firsthand of what does it mean to not just, write a requirement spec and chuck it over a wall somewhere and then check back in a quarter or two and see what happened, but actually sit physically with an engineering counterpart and, not just manage a backlog, but write a good user story and sit with an engineer and figure out hey, how do I make sure I don't leak design into this? I'm also just saying here's an outcome I'm after. And then make sure that whatever comes back is value and then use that, but also talk to customers and say, hey, did this work? Can we feed this back into our next cycle? And so for me, really appreciating that a product owner was an intense stakeholder in the work. It wasn't an arm's length participant. It wasn't someone who kind of sat in a different floor of the building. No, you should be pairing arguably with an engineer and getting just hopefully really rapid feedback. Because look, if it wasn't for Agile, I don't think you need the idea of a product owner. If we were shipping every 3 years, that was the old days. I was in those projects, those big waterfall projects where you did requirements for 9 months, you coded for a few months, and you did a bunch of integration testing for twice as long. And in that world, you are just chucking specs around. You're writing some requirements almost in the abstract. But in this world of to me, the biggest changes for software teams is moving to small batches. Small batch delivery is just a fundamental, philosophical change in how you ship software. I am learning quickly. I'm releasing quickly. I'm cutting up giant epic kind of goals into sort of micro releases to learn. And in that model, I don't see how you don't have someone, let's call them a product owner, who is intimately aware of what the customer's kind of after, but can also do a brilliant job of translating that into a workable story. And also, frankly, has a bit of the backbone to prioritize well. Because everyone wants to move certain things up and some other person's chirping in your ear this has to be more important or this is harder. And so you have to have a little courage. You have to be a good communicator. Absolutely. And then you have to have enough, I think, technical chops too, to be able to sit with an engineer and effectively kind of understand and translate what actually needs to happen and prove that what they built is the right thing. And then wash, rinse, repeat, do it again and again and again. So I think it's a very underrated role, but if it's done well, it's probably the thing that unlocks good software for most companies. Yeah. And I know you've, when you and I first started talking, you referred to a talk I did at the Agile Alliance a number of years back on this topic. And that was definitely when I was, that part of my life, I was coming out of leading, VP of product management for this startup, which got acquired by CenturyLink. We did that for a couple of years. We kind of scaled DevOps from 40 people to 400. And we had 30 something product teams. Each product team had a product owner. And so my worldview was very colored by that. I still agree with, I think, everything I mostly said back then. But my idea at the time of product management was different. So, I still like, I think I quoted in that piece or in that presentation, I still like Melissa Perry's definition. Like, product owner is a role, product manager is the job. And so you may have product managers who say, look, my job is to figure out the vision for this product, understand the goals, maybe even do a little bit of the sort of business ops of the product. Like, hey, what's the business metrics? How's the growth? What's the customer adoption like? And at the same time, you may be on your team also playing the role of partnering with your eng lead and figuring out, okay, for this sprint, for this release, for this quarter, whatever it is, here are our goals. Here's the sort of things we have to accomplish. Here's the user journeys or user stories. And then kind of maybe dip back into your product manager job in some cases and talk to customers and work with other teams on your go-to-market launch and things like that. So I've worked in places where they're separate and you have a product owner and then you have someone else who sits somewhere as a product manager. My personal experience, I'd have a great experience with that because the product managers were a little too far removed from the product owner work, and each team had their own roadmaps and they weren't in sync. And it's like, does this person talk to customers, but the product owner talks to engineers? Well, that's kind of broken because you really should have the product owner should be able to talk to customers, talk to stakeholders internally. They should be talking to engineers. Right? I think Marty Kagan just said that recently. I thought it was brilliant. So you can't ever lose that, right? A product owner needs to still be sitting there, readily talking to customers, readily talking to your internal teams that care about your product, and regularly talking to engineers. And that's kind of how Google does that. We really don't have a product owner per se. We have product managers who play that role on their team kind of as that function's needed, but they're also kind of running their product. And so you don't accidentally end up with a split. Now, I'm in outbound product management, which breaks the paradigm even further. Now you have another sort of person in role who also does a lot of customer stuff, does a lot of go-to-market stuff, things like that. So each org will be different. I think for some companies, you might have the process where you need dedicated product owners, especially project by project, product by product. You may have a product management sort of function potentially. I don't believe that's a hierarchy, like product owners report to product managers. I'm not sure that's the thing. But you might have some cases where, look, the product manager is the person who does the work, who does the product owner work, who does some PM work. And you might be at companies where you have product managers and outbound product managers. So there's going to be different paradigms. I think the important thing is who's going to make sure that you don't add a lot of friction between what are we trying to accomplish and how does that get broken into work that engineers can work on. Like as long as you don't add friction to that and mess up that process, I don't care what you call people. I mean, Pivotal was similar to what we kind of had done at CenturyLink, where you had, feature teams, product teams. They were long-lived, right? It wasn't just a general pool of people who swarm on a feature and then go off and do something else. You have long-lived teams. I'm a big believer in that DevOps style team structure, product team structure. And it doesn't mean the people stay there forever, but it means that team exists for a long time, right? That team should probably live as long as the product does. People are going to come and go. That's fine. But the idea that you have institutional knowledge in the team, you have people who aren't just prioritizing a release, because I've worked in enterprises where after V1, we all just scattered. And then to get V2 done, you had to fund a new project and you had to get a new thing. And that was 3 years from now. And so what does that mean you do? That means that V1 is so overstuffed with features and it's always late because no one thinks you'll ever get another shot at this. That's what broke that first, like the 40 years of software, was that you just jammed everything into those one big release because you never thought you'd do it again. And now in a feature team and a product team, how about I just keep delivering value? And if I'm a stakeholder, I don't freak out if my feature, my goal doesn't happen this month. It's going to happen next month. It'll happen the month after. Like, I'm building trust. And so kind of Pivotal had the same structure. You have long-lived feature teams. You have a product owner sort of person. You have balanced teams. We're big fans at Pivotal of this balanced team approach. So that feature team should be somewhat self-sufficient. You have a UX person. You have some sort of designer. You have some sort of product manager type person, and you have engineers. And for the most part, that team should be able to do everything. I should be able to do user research. I should be able to do my product prioritization. I should be able to do the eng work, probably some aspect of deployment. And therefore, there's no bottlenecks. And there's always integrations with other things you got to play with. So we kind of had that balanced team approach. At Google, I don't know, we're really well known as a product company. I've been reading some of the historical books on how Google works, which is a great book, kind of some of the background for our product mindset and product thinking. You might be surprised. I mean, there's not one methodology everybody follows here. Now, for the most part, there's a lot of commonality.
That's what I've heard.
There's some teams that have very, very close sort of product manager, product owner, and eng relationships. There's others that the product manager kind of writes the PRD, the requirements document, and kind of works with the eng to agree on kind of what gets worked on. And then they step back a bit and eng kind of cranks through and then finishes, and you do some acceptance testing and you're good. There's other teams where it's a little closer collaboration and you're more pairing regularly between the product person and the eng person. Cloud's weird because in one hand, we have some products that ship quarterly. We have other products that ship whenever they're done. And I love that personally. Like I love the idea that it's almost continuous planning, continuous release. That's kind of the cloudy model. It's not like, here's the quarterly release of the cloud. What's that mean? That makes zero sense. There's no quarterly release of Google Cloud. It's just, we're always updating.
Yes.
There's no version number of Google Cloud. That makes no sense. So everything's kind of updating. I think that sort of model is great for engineers too, because it means I'm not just waiting for my release cycle. I forget what I coded 3 months ago, and now I have to go back and bug it. Nope. I build, I ship. And one of the biggest things I've learned at Google, which is different than all the other places I've worked, is at a company like this, you get data quicker.
Yeah.
And so the harder part for a product owner, a product manager, is how do you sift through? I mean, I ship a feature and 5 minutes later I have telemetry.
Yeah.
That's bonkers. Like I'm used to shipping software at Pivotal where a lot of customers took 2 years to install the latest version. I might not know for 2 years if you liked my feature. Like that's, how do I plan that way? Like that's really tough. Versus now I can know 5 minutes later, did you check that box? Did you get some value from that? And so as a product owner, product manager, I have to be really good at identifying good data sources, adding telemetry to code, knowing how to find some signal in the noise. Because I could just get drowned in data points, which is the one that matters, which is the one that's showing the right metric, what's the right user trend. And so, product managers here definitely have to be good with data. They definitely have to be good at kind of writing, good requirements sort of documents with good critical user journeys. We do anchor on jobs to be done. We anchor on critical user journeys. How do you talk about an end-to-end, turn that into some sort of activities that get done, and then engineers crank on that. We do acceptance testing and ship all that. But each one's a little different, but each time the goals are the same. Are we building, for the most part, persona-driven, user-centric software that we can quickly verify if we did the right thing? I do believe that people with good product skills are portable. Like you don't have to stay in your domain. Like I could, in theory, be good at my job here in cloud and I could switch to YouTube and I'd probably do okay, even though I know nothing really about media. Now, what I don't believe is I could just rely on my generic product skills. So I think if you're gonna have a good relationship with the engineering team, you have to go deep in that domain. You might not have it when you get there.
Yep, 100%.
And that's fine. Like don't only hire people who know that domain. That's fine. But I need to hire someone who's obsessed with learning it. And as long as that's okay, we're good. An engineer is going to look at somebody who looks like, hey, is this just a stepping stone for them? Or they even care about my product? Or are they just here to give me generic advice? Are you getting in the trenches with them? Are you learning the thing? And that takes work, it takes commitment. But to me, I don't think that's negotiable. Like I don't see how you can do it otherwise. So if you want a good relationship with engineers, show you care about their thing and genuinely. Yeah, I guess there's a lot of bad ways to do it. It just, is it the noisiest customer syndrome? And we all know, like on one hand, we've all probably been there where, look, there is a really important customer and you do have to do things for them. And that makes total sense. But that also, if you're a good product owner, this is where it comes back to having courage and a little backbone. You can accidentally create a product for one customer at some point and realize like, oh my gosh, all we've done is make this really good for so-and-so. What if they left tomorrow?
What if
I don't even know who our other customers are. And so are you sourcing it just from that? No. Are you listening to the salesperson who stomps in the room and goes, you have to ship this or else I can't close this deal? Again, maybe. Or you might say like, that's not strategically important to this platform. Here, maybe we can do a half measure. Or how about you put me on the line with the customer and I can talk them through our roadmap. And that's probably actually not a deal closing problem. It's just something we're talking about here. So a good product owner is looking at customer data, of course. They are looking at, like we talked about in those feature review meetings, what does the support team say? What does that team who's getting support calls, or that field engineer who's constantly in the trenches putting in software, putting in services or installing things, what do they deal with? What's the market saying? Right? Are competitors all missing something? And you're like, goodness, how come no one supports this one idea? I bet if we did this, let me test this. Maybe we'll do a little MVP. Maybe we can actually carve out some new space. So it's not just people telling you what to do. It's you as a product owner, product manager, thinking of things you should work on by understanding the market, understanding things like that. So And then sometimes there's bugs, sometimes there's defects. We used to, and this is probably a little too extreme, but if a bug didn't make it into the next release, we dropped it. Only because it meant if it wasn't important enough to do right now, I'll wait till it comes up again. Now, not everybody should do that, and that's an extreme circumstance.
Yeah.
But you don't want to look up and see, I have a 1,000-item bug database. At some point, it's just stress. And it's like, oh gosh, there's this thing just weighed on my shoulder. Like, do they matter? Is anyone complaining about them? If they are, how can you fix them? If no one's complaining, they get rid of them, and they probably don't matter. So being kind of ruthless about not just having a 1,000-item backlog, but instead, maintain a vision of what you want to accomplish.
Yeah.
But don't just build some giant wish list of things where you go back like, wow, this thing's been on the backlog for 3 years. Get rid of it. It doesn't matter. If you haven't done it by now, it doesn't matter. So how do you source but also groom really well and and make sure that thing is tight, that you're able to retire things quickly, and then just have a long memory. So if something does come back in, like, oh, I remember we got rid of that a few months ago. Let's put that back in there and now move it to the top. So being good about sourcing it, not just with features, but with bugs, with automation improvements, technical debt pay down, some experimental stuff, right? Sometimes you as a product owner need to be looking out like 3 releases. And I've had this happen to me where I'll put something in a sprint and someone will go, why am I building this? Like, you'll see. And I'll explain why. I'm not trying to be cryptic.
Yeah.
But that, look, we have to do this first, which will then enable this. And then maybe 3-4 releases from now, that's when we get to light this thing up. So are you staging that? Are you foreshadowing a bit with some of that stuff? So it's not always instant gratification work either. Are you sourcing all kinds of things that set you up for the future? No, I mean, look, if I'm hiring someone, or if Google's hiring someone, or any of us, you're still looking for folks who are a lot of things we've talked about in this whole discussion. Are you a learner?
Yeah.
Are you someone who's going to come in here and invest in the relationship? You're not going to, you're going to have some courage, and you're going to have an opinion. And I want to hear your point of view. You're not just a yes person who comes in and says yes to everybody, or, you're going to come in with opinion. You're going to be observant. You're going to listen. And so, for people who come in, I'm a big believer in also kind of getting a win pretty quickly. I hesitate if I interview someone and I ask them, what do your first 90 days look like? And they just tell me they want to listen. That's not bad, but that also means you're going to spend 3 months kind of just observing. And what are you doing to kind of build, get a mark, build a relationship? Hey, my first 30 days, I'm going to use my product and I'm going to write a blog post on it. I like hearing that. You're telling me you're going to invest and you're going to produce.
Yes.
Right. So what are you going to produce early on? It doesn't mean they'll be awesome. Doesn't mean you're going to set the world on fire. You're probably not going to add some amazing feature to the product, but are you going to make a mark?
Yes.
What are you going to do to do something in your first 90 days? How are you going to make sure the team knows who you are?
Yes.
How are you going to make sure that you start to really get yourself in? So I look for someone who's ready to jump in. At the same time, they're going to, be a respectful team member, not immediately tell everyone they're wrong and they have no context. So what's your learning culture? What is your ability to produce? Are you going to fit in well from that perspective? I like hiring people with different personalities. My whole team does not look the same at all. So you have people who are quiet and loud and people who are introspective and extroverts, and that's all great.
Yeah.
So culture fit is different. Like Google, we talk about culture add. Who's an add to the culture? It doesn't mean culture fit. We don't all look the same. We're not all going to behave the same. We're all very different. Who adds to our culture? Who brings something to the table? So if I'm hiring someone, I'm thinking about what are you bringing to this team that makes us different and better, right? As much as that can be uncomfortable, because that's a person who does this and we don't have a person who does that. That's great though, right? That's going to make us better. So if I'm hiring someone, I'm thinking about what do they bring into the team? How are they going to get started with a bang? How are they going to be someone who immediately tries to build good relationships with stakeholders? And they're very customer centric. If you're doing those things, you're going to succeed in most places as a product owner.
Great to be here. I work with a lot of projects my company does software development, a lot of stuff for startups. And then the thing that takes most of my time is working on Agile coaching for the opposite of startups, things in the government space and banking space and highly regulated industries. So that's kind of the gamut of what we do. Well, I'm not called on very often to teach people how not to be Agile, but I do get to experience what it looks like a lot. The biggest thing I see is since Agile has become very much a buzzword for everybody wants to be doing it, it's really easy for people to say they're doing it without actually doing any of the stuff that it actually requires. There's a story for we were working in New York, and I needed to fly out of Kansas City, but we were going to be in Joplin, and I had some clothes that needed to be dry cleaned. And I live in a very small town, so there's no place here. So we were going to Joplin, then driving to Kansas City and flying to New York. And I saw that there was a 1-hour dry cleaner in Joplin. So I got my clothes and I was like, okay, if they can do it in an hour, I can drop it off when I get there, have my meeting, and then handle everything. So I called them up and said, okay, if I bring these clothes by at 9 o'clock, will they be done at 10? And they're like, yeah, they probably won't be done that soon. Like, okay, what about 11? I can stretch things out to that. Like, no, it usually takes 2 days. So I was like, okay, who is this that I called? And their name was actually 1-hour dry cleaner. So I said, who was this that I called? And they said, oh, it's 1-hour dry cleaner, but that's our name. It's not what we do. That's just what we call ourselves. And I've seen a lot of Agile teams that's what they do, right? It's like, we're an Agile team. Why are you an Agile team? Well, we're an Agile team because we say we're an Agile team. And that's not what makes you Agile, right? Being Agile is when you're actually following the principles and the values and saying, this is how we're making decisions. And it's very easy for teams it's a lot easier to say you're Agile than actually be Agile. It's the same thing with TDD or a lot of other practices, right? The number of people that say they're doing TDD is very large. The number of people that are actually doing it is much smaller.
Yeah.
So that's one of the biggest things I see with teams that aren't doing Agile is they get very focused on what they call themselves or what they call things. Like, we're going to have a daily stand-up. Okay. So the purpose of daily stand-up is to have the 15 minutes face-to-face communication. Well, I've seen teams that say they're doing that and say they're Agile, but one team that I saw, what they actually did is they would all wait out in the hall or in the elevator or other places, call in, talk for 15 minutes. And then once the meeting was done, they would come in and put on their headphones and go heads down. And it was all designed to keep from having to have actual face-to-face communication with each other is what they were doing. But they were saying, oh, we're Agile because we have this practice of doing a 15-minute meeting. And anyway, those are the types of things that I see teams doing. And it's like, if we go back and we actually look at what it means to be Agile, we're doing all kinds of opposite of those things. So that's what it means not to be Agile anyway. So usually what I'm doing when I come in and start working with a team, oftentimes they're looking for Agile, but they're also looking, a lot of times I get brought in specifically when they're saying we see a need for doing more test-driven development or behavior-driven development, some of those things as well. Mm-hmm. So usually I'll come in with a team and start working with them. First thing I do is I make sure that we all agree what the Agile principles and values are and talk through what that actually means for us. One thing I like doing is giving everybody cards with all 12 principles on them and say, okay, force rank these. What's the things that are easy to do here and you guys are doing great already on? What are the ones that are really hard? Put those at the bottom. Let's go through and talk through that. And it's amazing having that discussion because lots of people see different aspects of things. And so what's at top for one person is bottom for someone else. So it's bottom for someone else is top for you. So it's just very interesting to see them having that conversation. So that's usually what I'll do is go through that process of really making sure that we all agree what the Agile principles are. Because once we have that, we've got a shared foundation for making decisions, right? And then we can work through and decide what's good for this particular team. Right. And that's where I think a lot of things fail is because we start with a bunch of practices. Hey, we saw a team doing this and they were successful. We saw a team doing this and they were successful. Well, that may be successful for them because they got to that point by making decisions according to Agile principles. And if you skip that step and try to just copy what somebody else is doing, maybe you'll get lucky and you'll get the results you're looking for, but that's not what Agile is about. And when I'm coming in those situations, so I'll usually try to start with that with the team, but then also going with management, I usually do some training on leading it, how to lead Agile. And it's very simple things, but making sure that management is asking the right questions to encourage the behavior they want. Because if management is asking things that are counter to the principles, it's going to be harder. Then you've got team members that are like, they're torn. The manager is asking me for this, but I'm trying to follow these principles. You've got to make sure those things are all aligned.
Right.
So those are kind of the two sides I approach things. Like the first few days with the team is usually spent trying to make sure that we've got everybody on the same page from that perspective. So what I'm trying to, and that's a tough situation, right? You're coming in, you're being asked to do something, you don't feel it fully aligns. And one thing I've found is if there's 100 things you could improve, and 10 of those are the things that the organization wants to improve and you've actually got political backing for, start with those things, right? There's no sense just doing the things that are hard that no one wants to do. Start with the things that you can actually make some progress and where there's agreement. And hopefully, as you work through those things, you'll be able to get to the point that you can get some traction and some better understanding of what it means to be agile. So you can start incrementally doing maybe the things that the organization isn't as interested in changing or isn't as interested in implementing.
Yeah.
So I think that's where it's important. If somebody's bringing you in to work on something, say, hey, we want to be agile and we want you to implement these 3 practices. Start with those practices, but make sure you build a foundation for why those practices, or for those practices actually following the agile principles, and not just we're doing these practices for no reason, which may mean you sit down with everybody and go through the principles and say, what are the ones that are hard to follow, and lead the conversation to the point of, okay, we're having trouble following this principle. What if we take this practice? What if we try this practice that management is wanting you to do anyway? Let's try this practice and see if it helps us follow the principle better. Because if people are coming into something and they're just doing it because they're supposed to do it, but they're not actually basing it on any principles, they may be able to start saying they did the practice without actually getting the results from it. So, like, for example, one thing that I think of is when teams are wanting to use TDD or BDD or a lot of those things, or DevOps, or all kinds of things.
Yeah.
If we go back and we say, okay, what's the principle that we think this will help us do? And for example, a lot of times it's, can I deliver something? I want to be able to deliver something rapidly all the way through for the customer's competitive advantage. I want to be able to deliver something that gives the customer an advantage in the marketplace. Mm-hmm. And if I'm focused on, I'm doing this, I'm using TDD and I'm investing in TDD to follow this principle, or I'm investing in DevOps, then all my decisions around how I implement that are aligned with the principle I'm trying to follow and what I'm expecting to get out of it. If we just go and say, okay, like I've seen some teams or some organizations, they're like, oh, we need DevOps. So they spin up an entire separate department to do DevOps that's not related at all to the developers, and they're going to do DevOps, and it's just another silo that things are getting passed on to. And it's not that they don't get any advantage from it, but since they didn't start from the idea of what principle are we trying to follow, they've created something that does not let them reach their full potential. I've seen people try to do a lot of things. The thing I've seen that works the best is when we take a story and we're ready to work on it. It's in the to-do or ready to be worked on, not just assigned to the sprint, but we're ready to work on this. At that point, you get business, tester, developer together, and you talk through, okay, what does this actually mean? What are the requirements? And that's where you actually create the gherkin or the scenarios. And there's a couple of reasons for this, because I've seen a lot of people say, oh, well, we want to do it sooner. We want to do it in the previous sprint, or we're just going to have the business go and write them all. But the value of it isn't just that we have these things written. The value is going through the process of figuring out what those things need to be. And if we skip the process, we don't get the advantage of it. So you have to make sure that your cycle is designed to be short enough and that people have enough flexibility and enough slack in their work schedule that when the developer's ready to work on something, everybody can converge and work on it. A lot of times what I've seen is at the daily stand-up, somebody says, hey, I finished these things yesterday. I'm going to be ready for a new story. And so at the daily stand-up, people say, okay, what story? They talk, say, what should we work on next? Okay, here's what we're going to work on next. These people that need to be involved, stick around after the stand-up and we'll write the scenario. And that's a very rapid thing. Or, if you're in the middle of the day and you got something to work on, just pull people in. But you don't want that impeding your work. It's got to be part of the process. So I would think of DevOps of taking all the things we've learned about software development and all the things we've learned about agile deployment, and recognizing that the new state of the world, we can treat infrastructure the same way that we treat code. And if you're deploying stuff to the cloud, everything that you define about the cloud can actually be done in code. And if that's true, and it is, and you can leverage that, and all the stuff of being able to rapidly deploy code through, you can actually do with infrastructure as well. I've been on government projects where it's like, we need a server, and you hopefully will get that server in 9 months, huge amount of time before you get to try it. In the cloud, it can be, I wrote 3 lines of code and I can deploy it, and I have that server and I can tear it down anytime I want as well. So it's a very big investment, but if you're following principles that say doing things rapidly is beneficial to the client, it's you can have a lot of return on investment from it. I've been on teams and this was actually for the government, the place that took 9 months to get the server, that was for the server because they were deploying to production. But in their development stuff, they had scripted everything out, and they could stand up a complete development environment if they needed in, I think it took about 3 minutes to stand everything up. And they did it every day. Every day it would tear itself down at the end of the day. If they needed a new one, they'd stand it up the next day to have it there. In that particular case, what they had done is they had all the stuff happening in the cloud to test everything out. And then by the time they handed it off to run on-prem, it had been very, very well tested. But not just the code was tested, but all the configurations that needed to happen. Like if there was a change to the way that the web server was configured, that was done using DevOps and it was represented as code. So by the time something was ready to deploy to production, it was very, very well tested. And one of the reasons that they could deploy so rapidly through in 2 hours, even if they needed to, was because by the time it got over to the production side of things, where it wasn't necessarily just the team touching it, there were very few things that could go wrong because it had been so well tested, because all the infrastructure changes, other than the physical servers, were actually represented as code and tested in the cloud environment. A lot of teams, I find, kind of see QA as something that happens after you've created all the software.
Mm-hmm.
And if we do that, like if we chart out everything that needs to happen, and we're going to do QA after we test the software, I mean, sometimes even just in other sprints, like software say that they're done with stuff, or developers say we're done with something, and later somebody will test it. If you take that approach and you consider yourself done with the software before it's been fully tested, you have lots of hidden work. As a matter of fact, I've seen some teams that are making negative progress because they're opening more bugs than the stuff they're actually completing. Big project I know that spent huge amount of money on stuff and got into that situation. And I was like 5 years ago, I was talking to the people that are working on the project and say, here's what you're going to run into if you keep doing this. Here's some suggestions. And you don't need me to do these suggestions. These are really simple. You can do these yourself. And I just heard the other day, they had completely canceled the project. And this was a very, very well-known high-level consulting group, but that's the problem they got themselves into. And so they're starting it up with another group now. But the problem was the testing was something that happened after the fact. It wasn't part of the definition of done. And since it wasn't part of the definition of done, there was all this hidden stuff in there, and to the point that they were creating more work than they were actually finishing, which is not the situation you want to be in at all. And by the time those bugs came back all the way over, and those bugs were fixed, they created new bugs. So when it was tested again, new bugs went into the system. And it's a nightmare, but it's something that's very easy to happen in those situations. So you have to see your definition of done as meaning that this software is actually finished all the way. If the software is not finished all the way, you can't say you're done. You need to make sure that you still got all the bandwidth and the developers fully dedicated to getting it done. So that's where TDD and a lot of automated testing comes in, is because if I can actually take most of that QA stuff and put it at the beginning of the process, where I'm writing my tests and everything at the beginning or as I develop it, when I get to the end, I've now got a much higher confidence that this is done. It also means that I can probably have QA people doing manual testing if I need that as part of the process, because there's not as much they're needing to test. And I usually like to think of it, so I work on a lot of teams that have QA people involved in it. There are QA people. I'm down on some teams that are like, they've matured to the point and their BDD and TDD tests are so mature, they don't really have anybody doing QA. I mean, the business owners are going in and checking things out before it goes live, but there's nobody assigned to the QA role. So I usually like to tell QA, if we're using BDD and TDD and using it correctly, we're shifting what QA is trying to do. And instead of QAing the software, they're QAing our process of writing tests for the software. So what they're checking is making sure, are there any tests that we should have written that we didn't write? Because we want to feed that back in to make sure that next time we write some tests, we don't have any blind spots in it. And they're doing almost the same thing, but it's a subtle difference in how you approach your job of being QA is there to change the way that the process works. If you think of it like a factory, somebody at the end of a factory line, and you've got these cars coming out at the end, somebody who sees their QA's job is to point out the cars that there's something wrong with it. Okay, that has value. They don't go out and stuff. However, somebody that sees their job as QA to help figure out how to improve the factory so those cars don't come out in the first place, They're going to
Right.
be doing the same type of inspection, but it's a different mindset, and it has tremendously more value because then we're not just finding problems, we're using that to actually fix the root of the problems, not just saying, okay, well, this is broken. No, that's a good question. And I hear a lot of confusion around kind of the product owner role. And different organizations have to approach it very differently, right? There's some organizations where I've worked on some government stuff where like the people that actually benefit from the software for whatever reason are somewhere else and removed and maybe don't even understand what the software does. They just get the benefit. So there's somebody else that's kind of a proxy for them. So those types of situations happen. The most effective product owners I've ever worked with, though, were the people that worked with the software on a day-to-day basis, but their focus was, in addition to working with the software, being there for the team to help answer any questions, explain what needs to be done, and guide what gets worked on next. And I've been on teams where the product owner was one team, I'm thinking of a distributed team. We had people in San Francisco, Birmingham, DC. I was working remote in Kansas. We had some people in Michigan, Philadelphia. So all spread out. They were online 8 hours a day on video, just like we are here. So in the team rooms where people were in team rooms, big screens up on it, all on video conference 8 hours a day, including the product owners. So the product owners were in their team room working, but they were always available both audibly and visually if there was ever a question about something. So during the day when they weren't needed, they were actually using the software to do the work that they would do. But if there was ever a question, they were right there because their priority was to help the team, but they needed to work with software to make sure they understood everything about it. And that was their main job, but they were dedicated to the team in that level. So when on the stand-ups, they were there. If a developer ever had a question, it was like being in the same room, except for they happened to be geographically distributed, but they were on video conference with them all the time. Those product owners were incredible. They understood the software inside and out, and they were since they were so embedded, since they were so much just part of the team, they were able to be very efficient in what got done and what didn't. So they could make decisions, and the developer would say, this is kind of hard. It was all conversations, right? What you asked for is kind of hard. This other thing I think gives you what you're looking for, but is really, really easy. And they could say, oh yeah, that's perfect. Let's go and do that. Or no, that doesn't work. That doesn't work at all. We've got to do it the hard way. So product owners that are really, really engaged, know the software in and out because they use it, but are there for the team just constantly and see themselves as part of the team. Those are the most effective product owners I've worked with. And so that's a model can't always do it, but that's a model I'm trying to always encourage people to move toward.
I'm a builder at heart. So I started in engineering. I started my career at Micron, where I was building a software product, a critical software product that was used in the manufacturing plant. So how I got into product from there, basically, I followed my curiosity, which is something I encourage folks to do. What I realized was I was more and more interested in the user experience, making it better, making the product better, enhancing and putting new features that would help folks using the product in manufacturing. There are 3 key points I wanted to make here. One is, manufacturing, if you don't know, is very similar to like customer service, where jobs have high churn, right? So there are constantly new people coming in. From a product perspective, what that meant was I had to make things really easy and intuitive for the users because there were, constantly new folks coming in and using the product. So that's one. And the second thing is high quality software was mission critical, right? Because any downtime or delay led to like loss in throughput and therefore like dollars lost for the business because manufacturing can't like build stuff, right? Like if the software is down. And then the third thing, which I attribute to like getting more into product, what I was doing was like walking in my customer's shoes, right? What that meant was I would get into a bunny suit. That's what they called the clean room suit. So that you're not tracking in dirt from outside and all of that, which is really important in a manufacturing environment. dress up in my bunny suit and would like go and see what are folks doing, how are they interacting with the software, what are the issues they're facing. I really wanted to get a very good intuitive feel for firsthand how the product was being used, what were some of the key problems and friction points that the users were facing, so that I could continuously work on improving it. So I was an engineer, started playing more and more of the product function in a place that had that big gap, right? And I did that as an engineer, but that same thing you can do if you're in other parts, other functions too, especially like if you're in startups, a lot of times there's a big gap in terms of, roles to be done because there's usually tight headcount and all of that. So you can play different roles even if you're not officially part of product, and then learn more about like how to do product and get into it. When I joined LendingTree, my role was basically to find ways to make the product more data driven, right? When I joined, most of the product, was very like rules based, not really driven by machine learning. We were using data to make data driven decisions, and that was the other part of my role. But primarily what I was doing was looking for opportunities to make the product data driven. And now this was prior to LLMs. But a lot of folks, I feel like now when they think about AI or machine learning, they think, right? But there was AI even prior to LLMs. And so when I was at LendingTree, this was prior to ChatGPT and the explosion of what that has brought for us. So what that meant at that time was basically bringing in like predictive analytics, doing lead score modeling, and those sort of algorithmically driven things to make the product better, right? And that can include like better matching, better sorting, better like giving signals back to marketing in terms of like scoring leads and understanding like how much marketing efficiency we can have like from different channels, right? And balancing the CAC with the LTV. So going back to that, so my role was like doing that, and basically that involved like optimization. So Tree is a form-based product. So if you think about like users going to LendingTree, they fill out a form, and then from there, like they get loan seekers get matched to lenders, and then we show them like all the offers that they have in their at their disposal. So it involved things like optimizations within the form, like how we route customers based on everything they're filling in and what we're learning about the customers, to like making the matching algorithm data driven, right? So previous to me getting there, it wasn't data driven at that time. It was more of like a simple sort, and making, so then my role was basically, under my leadership, we made it algorithmically driven, which meant using an algorithm to optimize where we thought, based on all the signals that we had at that time, where that loan seeker was most inclined to get a loan. So optimizing them for those lenders. And then all the way to the end of the journey, right, where we LendingTree would show all the offers to the customers, making that full user experience in a way that would drive conversion and close loans, because that's ultimately the goal, that for the loan seeker and also for LendingTree and the loan originators. So making that experience better and making it algorithmically driven, understanding the customers, different customers, right? Customer profiles. So for instance, like a customer who has very low credit score versus a customer who has high credit score they're looking at very different things. And we need to make sure we're highlighting those different attributes within the page, right? So
Got you.
so yeah.
Yeah.
So those were some of the key things. So Amazon culture is, the PM is the CEO of the product, right? So that's the product-led nature at Amazon. They own the strategy and the execution. So as a product leader, what I did was I challenged my team to own the strategy and the execution. And by that, basically what that involved from a strategic perspective was there were 4 key elements. One is to have a really tight 1 or 2-liner about what the vision of the product space that they're owning involves. Number 2 is having tenants. So tenants are basically 5 or 6 different rules on how you make decisions for your area. So what's interesting about tenants is that recognizing that every product has the push and pull going on, right? So the need for speed versus making data-driven decisions, right? Those are inherently in conflict because the more analysis you do, the better decisions you can make, but then you will go slower, right? So there are always these type of decisions that are in conflict, but tenants help you understand which ones to prioritize, right? So in the example, for instance, once you have 70% of the information that you need to make a decision, moving fast gives you that advantage. So that could be a tenant, right? We move once we have 70% of the information. So things like that. So just being really clear, product manager, about how you're making decisions and making sure that your engineering team, your designers, your business analysts, your marketers, they understand how you're making those decisions by having these tenets that are documented and communicated across the org. So that's the second big pillar. Third one is one that is widely written about. There's even a book about it, Working Backwards. And that is a strategy that we use at Amazon. To working backwards basically means you come up with a North Star vision for what your product will look like in the future. And you write a PRFAQ. And the PRFAQ is basically, think of it like a press release for your product that's 3 years in the future. And you're talking about what the product is, what needs it solves. We'll even put in customer quotes that it's not real. What the customer will say when you release that product into the market 3 years from now. And then the FAQs are frequently asked questions that go into a lot of detail about how you're going to, that's the execution part of it, right? How you're going to bring that vision to life, right? And the FAQs can have 3 elements of it. One are for the customers, so for your external customers, questions that they will ask once you put this press release out, and you will want to have clearly defined answers for them. Second tier would be for your stakeholders, right? So what maybe you're working with other PMs within that product or adjacent product areas, and what type of questions will they ask? Will they have to make changes to their products to support this release and whatnot? And making sure you're thinking through how your product changes will impact other products within Amazon, and making sure you're addressing those questions as well. And then the third set of questions will be around questions that leadership is going to ask you, right? So it might have questions around the business impact, and it might have questions around what type of additional resources you're going to need to make this vision come to life, and all of that. So The FAQs kind of holistically help us understand, what is it going to take to bring this to life, and making sure that the PM is thinking through all of that. So that's the whole working backwards PR FAQ process. And if you're interested and folks are interested on the working backwards process, I encourage you to more about it. There's, like I said, there's a whole book about it, but yeah, there's, you can come to me with questions as well. I led workshops at Amazon about PRFQ process as well. Yeah, so the strategy part, I would say, obviously you can go into the strategy you can focus on from a business angle, right? So you can think about, I like to use, the SWOT framework when I'm thinking about different products, right? In terms of what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses, what are the key opportunities and threats for the business. Think about it from that perspective. In terms of specifically about how to improve your product strategic work, right? The way that I encourage folks to think about this is twofold. One is really figure out what is the way that you learn, right? And the answer usually is a mix of theoretical and hands-on, right? What I noticed is a common pitfall people make is they'll go read books or blogs, or they'll attend podcasts or webinars and all of that. But what really works is also adding a mix of hands-on experience, right? So I encourage people to go, as they're going about their day-to-day lives, right? Think about what is the product motivation for this? What are the key user segments that this product is serving, right? And then think about the whole user journey, right? What are the pain points they're solving? Where are they doing well and where are they not doing well in terms of solving those pain points? So how would you improve that product, right? Really be critical as you're going through. We have our phones these days. We have so many apps that we interact with on a daily basis. Take some time and clarify what your point of view is in terms of these categories, right? What is the product motivation? Are the trends, right? Are the trends favorable or unfavorable, or based on what you know about the universe? And then delve into what are the use cases? What are new use cases, adjacent use cases you can go after for growth, right? So go into that whole process very methodically, right? I'm an engineer, so I think very logically, right? So you go through those steps very methodically, form your point of views, and then from there, I promise you, if you're doing that on a weekly basis or any regular cadence that works for you, you are going to come out ahead in terms of understanding the strategy and being able to communicate your point of views around strategy. Yeah. So in terms of what a product person needs to know to build AI-driven products is, there are three things that, in terms of identifying, I think, be clear about what is the objective that you're going after, and what is the goal, right? In terms of what you're doing, and be clear if AI is the right tool for that job, right? Sometimes, just because we have a hammer, every problem seems nail, right? But sometimes it can be over-engineered, right? So make sure that AI is the right tool, especially with generative AI. There's a lot that can be done, and in terms of different solves that you can create for the user. Just make sure you're really clear about what the objective is, how much you think you can move the needle for whatever you're solving for, right? Whether it's clicks, engagement, acquisition, whatever it is that you're solving for. Make sure you're clear about like what the goals are and what's reasonable to accomplish. That's going to help you set up for better decisions. Number 2 is in terms of the PM's role, like, in terms of algorithm, right? Like it can be like algorithm selection, you could probably link to your data scientist, but in terms of the PM's role, right, it's really around understanding what are the features and what are the constraints, and making sure you're leading that charge. And by features, I don't mean like profit features. What I mean is like different data points, right? Like what are and examples are helpful in this scenario, but I know we're kind of running up on time, so I won't go into too much detail. But basically, what are the key data points and that your algorithm is going to use, like those signals that they're going to use to solve for whatever it is you're solving for. And then from there, making sure that you're defining the constraints. Constraints is really important in LLMs because it's like large language models, they'll go anywhere, right? So the example I like to give is Air Canada deployed this chatbot that ended up giving like coupons to users. It was not something that was envisioned, but it wasn't an explicit constraint provided to the chatbot. So at the end of the day, Air Canada had to honor those coupons, even though they didn't
really intend to.
they didn't authorize their chatbot to do that.
Yeah.
But it was an agent of their company, right? So you have to honor it. So make sure as a PM, like constraints, you don't forget about. That's really important. And then the third area is like with machine learning, LLMs, like data is really important. You're using data to like guide the product journey. So basically, like think clearly about where the data is coming from. What are the challenges of that data? How you should think about like what data you should use versus not, and those sort of things. Because garbage in, garbage out still. I think we live in this world right now where things are changing a lot. I am somebody who thrives on change. So if you're also somebody who thrives on change, I think it's going to be a good and exciting time, right? Like it's definitely not going to be boring.
Yeah.
And that's one. And the second thing to me is like creativity is still something that AI is going to struggle with, right? So thinking and then creativity. So for creativity, you need to get out of your box, right? You need to do a lot of things, be passionate about different hobbies. So I would recommend that. Like live your life fully, get out there, do different things, and you'll be more creative because of that. And that will be a big unlock that AI isn't able to deliver. Maybe it will. I've read some papers on how it's being more creative too. But I think it's a longer way off. So we'll be doing more and more creative work. And I think the more you can focus on getting out of your box, being creative, that will be a superpower.
I started off my career as a developer, worked through a couple different companies, some death mark projects doing waterfall, and this Agile thing came about, and I was one of the biggest naysayers out there about Agile. And then, I went to this conference and I saw Bob Gallen speak, and it started to click for me, and I was like, okay, I get what Bob's saying, but this is not what I'm hearing over here from these books or these other articles that I was reading. And so I kind of dug into what Bob was saying and some different parts of the community, and learned a lot more and embraced a lot of different things. Fast forward a couple years, I joined this consulting company, and it was a company that, had a strong foundation from Ken Schwaber, and worked with him closely on how they use Scrum back in, it was like right after Scrum.org got, formed around 2010. And so we were working on these turnkey solutions where you can kind of buy a whole entire development team, whole Scrum team, really, product owner, Scrum Master, the full stack development team, and they would develop a product for you, and did that for a while, and then got into Agile coaching. And about a year ago now, I started my own company and doing Agile coaching and training. And so I'm a Scrum.org coach or trainer. So I'm a professional Scrum trainer with Scrum.org. So I do training. I train a lot of different classes, from Scrum Master, Product Owner, team courses focused around UX and Kanban, scaling, all different types of things. And so I just, teach a variety of courses and work with a lot of different people and organizations. But I really enjoy spending time doing both the coaching and the training. So I spend a lot of time doing both, not just the training, because I like to, practice what I preach and talk about, and I like to apply and try a bunch of different experiments out and learn from those things. Yeah, I think that I have a deep care for people. And once you've worked for purpose, some bigger purpose, and you've been on a really high functioning team doing that, where you had autonomy, you were able to master your craft, there's really no way you ever want to go back to something different. You never want to just be that cog in a machine. And so I hope to kind of unleash, people within organizations and help them to really be the best versions of themselves and work for, whatever purpose, is meaningful for them in their lives. Yeah, I think the first question is how do you know you need that many people right now? How do you know you don't need, 10 people, 9 people? How do you know you need to scale?
Yeah.
So I guess I would ask, what problem are you trying to solve? Why do you think, or, what is your goal? What are we optimizing for? And once we know those things, it's like, well, how many people are actually doing the work? And what advantages do we have by adding multiple teams? Because every time you add more teams, you lose a little bit from that first team. So if we got one team that can solve a problem and we add another team, that first team just lost a bunch of efficiency. They lost a bunch of factor. They're going to produce less because they have to coordinate with that other team.
Yeah.
Now you add a third team. Now the first and the second team lose a little bit, and the third team comes in and they're not going to, they got to catch up. And so every time you're adding a team, you're losing something. And so you need to be able to measure how much value is being added by each team and kind of know when to stop scaling and adding more teams. The problem, though, that I see with most organizations is that when they decide to scale, they tend to add like a product owner over each team. And then they say, well, they need to coordinate and sync, and there's dependencies between them.
Yeah.
And so then they put another product owner, an Uber product owner, over the top of that product owner. Maybe they call it a product manager, something like that. And then they'll add another one on top of that. And then they're like, we have technology concerns, and we need tech leads at each of those levels. And we need to have, someone that can help manage the dependencies. We'll call them a Scrum Master, an Agile coach, that, they'll rename these things that they are. I actually walked into one organization one time, and they had just as many people that were up there on that product owner, transformation, tech lead, Scrum Master level, people not doing the work, to the people that were actually developing, doing the work. So, I mean, if you scale 50 people and you have 25 that are telling you how to work and 25 people doing the work, that doesn't work very well, right? Like, there's not a lot of autonomy. There's a lot of churn, a lot of work that's getting created. And so people create a lot of work when that ends up happening. So I call that scaling demand. So the demand is the demand of work, more work's being generated, instead of scaling delivery, the people that actually deliver the work. So when we scale, if we are going to scale, we want to scale the problem-solving teams that can solve any problem that's off of your product backlog. Now, then that's not typical. Another common pattern is a lot of organizations will create teams that are aligned around subsystems. So maybe it's an application, or maybe it's like we have a database team, we got a back-end team, we got a front-end team, we got a QA team, maybe not even a QA team anymore, a UX team, or a Salesforce team, or something else, down the road. And then there's handoffs between each of those teams, and each of those teams have a backlog. Well, that's a lot of dependency management. How do you know what the most important thing is?
Right.
So those aren't really great patterns either for scaling, because you're just adding a lot of churn into the system and delay when you scale like that. Yeah. So I think there's some main rules of thumb when we're going to start to scale Scrum. And so if you remember these relationships, it'll help you. When you have one product, you have one product owner. You have one product backlog.
Got you.
You have one to many teams. You have one definition of done. And you have one done increment, one done product at the end. So then the next question that people often ask is, Okay, so what is a product?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where most people go wrong, is they define their product very narrow, and maybe not even wrong. They just are optimizing for something maybe that they don't know they're optimizing for.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a very narrow product definition,
Mm-hmm.
just say your product is something, it's just this one little application or one little thing inside of it. You're gonna, at some point, the companies need to allocate dollars to say, how much are we investing in this thing?
Right.
And then when something like COVID happens and you say, oh my gosh, this plan we made for the whole year needs to get thrown out the window, it makes it very difficult to move that money around, move the teams around to say, now we need to work on this, now we need to work on that. And it doesn't have to be COVID. It can be, there was a company I worked with, and there was a major vendor that they had. And basically once they came to them, I don't know, maybe it was March or something like that. And right after, they did all their yearly planning that they normally did. And they said, oh, we're not going to be able to accept payments for you. And this is a, Fortune 500 company. And they're like, so this whole process isn't going to work. Well, there's going to be no cash flow coming in November if we don't get this thing fixed. Well, and the way they used to work, it might have taken 3 to 6 months to even put a team around that, because you'd have had to fight to find some people that actually could work on this problem. Well, if you just have problem-solving teams, you just say, hey, this is now the number one thing in the backlog.
Yeah.
Teams A, B, and C, you're working on it because you're the teams that are available, and start tackling this thing and figure it out. And so that gives you a lot more flexibility as an organization to respond to change.
Right.
And so that product definition is always a tricky thing, but I always look at a couple factors, and I look at the code bases. So where's our dependencies between the code when we're developing, if this is a software product? I look at who are the people that are actually doing the work. If we think that we really have, we call them projects or products, but they're projects, and they're really the same people, but we're splitting them across 5 different things and wanting to work on all the same time.
Yeah.
Hey, I need your help working on this thing. And be like, no, that's my Tuesday thing. It's Wednesday. You have to wait till Tuesday to come back and work on me.
Yeah.
With me. Like, that delays everything a week, right? Like, those types of things happen. So why don't we just stack and rack all those things into one list and just say, this is our broader product, and here's how we deliver business outcomes. I always think of it as a product. I also look at customers. Who do you actually buys your product, or who uses your product? And you should align around those types of people as well. And think about what people outside of your organization would call your product. So think about it outside in, not inside out. When you're in an organization, a lot of times something feels like a product, but it's really not a product to anyone outside. You should almost be able to put a P&L around any project you have.
Yeah.
Oh, it's never profit and loss center is what you should be able to put around it. Yeah, I think if I'm in that scenario, I want to make sure that I have the autonomy to make calls on decisions, right? And they're respected in my organization. I want to make sure that I have visibility and maybe ownership into financials, P&L. I want to see the P&L. I would like to have ownership into that. And I want to just make sure that as long as I have the responsibility and accountability that a product owner should have, and there's much more we could get into, then I'm okay. Then I'm in a good spot. Now it's like, now you need to continuously improve. Like, you're going to make mistakes. No one's going to be 100%, make 100% bets on all the experiments and hypotheses they have, and they're going to be right. There's a reason they're hypothesis, they're guess. So you need to be able to learn quickly with small experiments that are cheap and validate things in the marketplace. So if I had to boil down the 3 things, we talk about this a lot, it's from that org community for a product owner. You have 3 main things, the 3 V's of product ownership. Set the vision, make sure you're getting value that's being delivered by the development team, you're maximizing value that's being delivered, and then validate that you're getting that value. And you don't validate that value until you actually deliver it to a marketplace and you measure with that value that's actually coming back.
Right.
So I like to think really, when I'm a product owner, I don't want to get down into the weeds. I want to be, here's the objectives, here's how we can solve it, here's some ideas, team, let's talk about how do we actually solve this and get this to this objective, and prioritize at that higher level. Yeah, so I'd say the first thing is don't solve a problem for the team. Your job isn't to give them a fish, it's to teach them how to fish, right? So your job is to ask questions, to not solve the problem, and it's gonna be painful at times. I mean, it's gonna be painful. Right. There's times where I start working with new teams and I count I used to count to 8 when we were in person in my back of my head, and I'd wait for them to say something. And sometimes they wouldn't say anything after I get to 8. It'd just be this big, long, awkward silence. And I just wouldn't say anything. I'd be like, like, how do you want to handle this? And no one would say anything. Now when we're virtual, sometimes it's 12 or 15. And it's like, eventually people get like, I'm not going to do this for you. You're going to have to figure it out on your own. And then part of it isn't, I don't think it's people being resistant. I think that for the longest time, people have said, oh, you can choose and you can pick, but if you pick the wrong answer, I'll pick for you. And they're just like, oh, I'm sick of it. So they're waiting for the rug to get pulled out from underneath them. And they're like, I'm just not going to, engage with it. And so you have to really build that trust up that, you really get to figure out how you're going to work and you're going to be accountable for delivery. And so, it's good for you to take some ownership in that. And what I like to do is then give them multiple options and be like, well, here's multiple ways you could solve this problem. Here's 3 or 4 ways that I've seen teams solve this problem.
Right.
There's one of those you want to try, or does that give you an idea of something else you'd like to try? And then they might come up with and be like, well, how would you handle this? Or how would you handle that? And I'll give them different questions, things that I'm thinking about. Hopefully I'm helping them think about problems the way I'm thinking about them, but I'm not solving the problem. So think about taking on different stances of a teacher, a mentor, a coach, a facilitator, not a problem solver, but like a manager of the process of like how of the environment people work in. Those are all stances to be thinking of, and don't fall into the scribe, secretary type of a stance where you're doing things for people. You're being the person that enters stuff into Jira or TFS or whatever tool you're using. The person that, does all the dirty work. That's not your job as a Scrum Master. So I guess I would coach people to stay away from those types of things and to really embrace what a true Scrum Master is, and that servant leader. But that doesn't mean it's a servant leadership is still leadership. It's not just somebody who gets walked over, right? So you need to lead through influence, through control. You need to reveal instead of tell. And so revealing the system to people is a really powerful skill set for Scrum Masters. What I mean by that is you don't have to tell them the answer, reveal it to them. Show them, here's the problem. Maybe it's with data, maybe it's with stories, whatever it might be. But when you can reveal the systems, people can't unsee that. And then they have that set shift, and they're going to make all the right decisions, or at least the decisions in the same direction you would once they understand that. I would say that everybody has imposter syndrome. So I talked about Bob Galen right beforehand. He just had an article on LinkedIn about he has imposter syndrome. And here's a guy who's has multiple books that he's authored. He's teaches agile leadership at executive levels across major companies, and people look at him as the expert, right? But he still feels that. I think everybody feels that. So it's okay. It's normal. I would say have confidence. Continue to learn, always be seeking to learn. Those would be some of the things I would look to do as a Scrum Master to maybe get rid of that. I don't know, how do I actually, provide value, or am I good enough to do this, or do I have the right answers? But the question of really, how do you get away from the, I don't know if I'm providing value. I think you have to say, my job isn't to produce stuff. It's to make sure that I'm promoting a culture where people can grow and to flourish, and the team can flourish. So you're taking more of a stance like a gardener. Like, you don't actually make the garden grow. You just create the environment for them to grow. And so that's what your job is. And so look, you're on the watch for conflict. You're trying to, mine for conflict and say, when something's small, let's figure out what's going on there. You're helping the team to figure out how to run the most effectively and teach them. Another good measure is like, hey, what happens when you're not there? Can the team function without them? Are you helping them to not be reliant on you? Are you kind of almost working yourself out of a job? If you're doing that, that's probably a great thing, because when the team itself can now operate more independently and is high functioning, that gives you the flexibility to work on higher level things. Now you can go and work with the product owner, especially if it's across multiple teams. And now you can go work at the organization and say, hey, that HR practice where we promote individuals over teams, like that totally negates what we're talking about from a Scrum standpoint, because it's all about the team. And here we're saying it's all about the individual and hero. And those are in a conflict. How do we solve that? Right. And so, whatever the next biggest dependency that you have on your team. So there's an organization where it's like, oh, every year we rip these Scrum teams apart and we reform them on however we decide to do it because we change the whole funding of where things are funded. So we get a high functioning team and then we break it apart and then we have to rebuild all that every single year. How do we stop that from happening? Those are big problems that aren't solved overnight. And as a Scrum Master, when your team's working on is highly functioning and can handle things without you, then you can go work on those big problems. Organizational agility is one of the things that I don't focus on agile transformations or just the agile journey. I think of Scrum and Kanban and extreme programming as tools to get us there. I like to dive more into what are the things inside the system that are stopping us from being more agile. How can we share information more frequently? How can we apply the transparency throughout? So why create a policy, right, to manage expenses? Would transparency just fix that? What if we just made that stuff transparent and it would self-regulate itself? Like how can we open up flexibility so people can make decisions and have free flow of information? Those are things that I'm really passionate about, and they get outside of the Scrum team roles. They're more about like all the sub areas within the organization that support products being built. But they definitely create an environment and a culture, and I think those are the areas that I like to focus on right now. So I keep working with teams on that, and every team's a little different, and there's a lot of patterns that have emerged, but I'd say it's even more complex than maybe some of the product development world we're walking through some of those obstacles.
All right, that's a wrap with this episode. Thank you for listening till the end. We hope these podcasts are providing value on your Agile journey. If you haven't visited our website, theagilecoach.com, we highly suggest you for other courses and supporting material on your journey. You can also get access to our self-paced courses or learn more about the live training that we provide to become a Scrum Master, Product Owner, Product Manager. With that, we will see you on the next episode. Love and best wishes from the Agile Coach.